I would like to introduce Ms. Sally Craig-Huber, who is our next moderator for our final and closing plenary. So for those of you who don't know Sally Craig, you should. Our last plenary is on advocacy, and the reason that we asked Sally Craig to moderate is when I was trying to think of a strong female moderator and someone who epitomizes advocacy in the community, Sally Craig is who I thought of. So very grateful for her leadership and her mentorship and her joy in advocating and leading a team every year when we go to Capitol Hill to talk about the importance of faith-based organizations and people of faith in this space, because many times people on Capitol Hill think that Christians are against global and foreign assistance. So this should be a very interesting panel. So if the panelists could please go to the table and Sally Craig could come up. Oh, they're going to stay. Okay.
We have a plan.
They have a plan. All right. Well, Miss Sally Craig.
Thank you, Mona. And I'm honored, I think, to be moderating this very last plenary session. It's wonderful that so many of you stayed for this. Mona said our topic is ending extreme poverty through advocacy. And what a fitting topic to close with, to help us focus and wrap up our time together by asking ourselves, what will each of us do to contribute to the cause of ending extreme poverty, and how will we do that? To help us explore that question, we have three very experienced panelists who I think are going to bring us a really nice range of ideas about how we can go forward from this conference. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Eric Mitchell, who is listed in the program, was unable to be with us. So that's all right. It gives our three remaining speakers more time. I'm not going to spend their time by reading their bios. They're all in your book, but I'll just be brief and introduce all three at once, and then you guys can march to the podium. First up, we have Jason Fileta, who is the director of the Micah Challenge USA. We have Katie Kraft, who is the Advocacy Coordinator for Healthy Families, Healthy Planet from the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church. And finally, last but not least, we have Yoram Siame, who is the Advocacy and Public Relations Manager from Church's Health Association of Zambia. So let's take a journey through how we can all go forward and advocate for what we've learned. Jason.
Good afternoon. I feel, I'm doing stuff over here. Yeah, I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to share with you all. I feel very much out of my league because the expertise in this room on international development and specifically health really blows me away. My lack of expertise also blows me away. So I'm just very humbled to be here and prepared to disappoint you. So I'm gonna not spend a ton of time talking about Micah Challenge. If I stand up straight, can you still hear me? Okay, I feel this need to get closer. It's so far away. But I really want to just paint a picture of how we approach advocacy, because advocacy, I've learned, is defined very differently by lots of different people. It has a lot of different meanings. And so in defining advocacy and describing how we approach it, my hope is that we can kind of explore possibilities for our own action. We can better understand who God is and what God wants from his people. And throughout, you'll see a lot of pictures of various advocacy activities in Micah Challenge in the US and abroad. Here there are university students meeting with their member of parliament in Australia. There's women in Benin marching in the streets for maternal health. There's a picture from a really cool campaign in South Africa called Promising Life for mothers and children. And of course, a picture of some of our own advocacy in the US that was focused on the president. So without telling you too much about Micah Challenge, in case you're already or totally unfamiliar, the things I do want you to know are that we grew out of Christians in the Global South, working both in the church world but also in the development world, local churches, denominations, and also people working in indigenous-led relief and development organizations. If you know the Micah Network, we were born out of the Micah Network. We are now reunited as one organization, but it's frankly too expensive to change our name in the US. So we remain Micah Challenge US, but globally it's now Micah Global. And the different nations are just Micah, that nation. So transformational advocacy. I hear advocacy used in a lot of ways. The three ways I primarily hear advocacy used is to cleverly describe fundraising. And so your fundraising department simply goes out and tries to gain funds, and they do that by asking for a check. But your advocacy department raises money by asking people to run a race or do a ton of push-ups or grow their beard for a year or some other really strenuous activity, and they receive donations in exchange for doing that, and that's a lot of that comes out of what is now called advocacy departments. Maybe you have one of those. Obviously, advocacy refers to political action and policy change. In our circles, I think that's probably the most traditional use of advocacy is work for change in policy. And then finally, advocacy is also used to describe marketing in the promotion of not a cause, but an actual institution. So there are organizations that have directors of advocacy or advocacy departments that are building and mobilizing people to become spokespeople for their organization. And so that is what is often advocacy. So what do we define advocacy? And I want to sort of present to you that the end goal of advocacy is not fundraising, and it is not political change, and it is not just awareness about an organization or even an issue. The end goal of advocacy should always be securing justice. And I'll repeat that. The end goal of advocacy should always be securing justice. And so at Micah Challenge, we worked hard with a lot of other agencies. Mona, I think, was a part of this event where we tried to come up with the definition of advocacy we could really get behind. And we thought it would take 15 minutes. It took 3 days. And then it improved after that. So we had to add an adjective so that we could sort of distress people into realizing there's something different about how we define this. So transformational advocacy is challenging ourselves and our leaders to change attitudes, behaviors, and policies that perpetuate injustice and deny God's will for all creation to flourish. There's a handful of other organizations that are part of the Accord Network, which we are also part of, and I believe CCIH is a member of. Chad Hayward is here from there. There are a number of other organizations who've started using this definition of advocacy as well. So I want to pull out some of the key elements of this definition because they help describe what advocacy means and how we try to implement it. This definition of advocacy looks at ourselves as well as our leaders. I'll never forget when we were planning in 2009, we were planning a global anti-corruption campaign with all the Micah Challenge people around the world. And my colleague from Nigeria stood up and said, how can we ask the government to do something we won't do ourselves? The church is corrupt. And how can we go to the government and talk about transparency when our pastors are flying around in G6s, which Creflo Dollar, pastor in Atlanta, just purchased one. I read that in the news today. Now, all that is to say, I will accept a G6 if someone in the audience is willing to offer one. So advocacy has this introspection, not just an outward look. Certainly we challenge our leaders. Certainly we challenge corporations. Certainly we challenge the culture around us, but certainly with integrity, we have to challenge ourselves. We have to look at our own lives. We have to look at our institutions and the decisions we make, how we hire people, how we treat people. And so advocacy is this holistic ourselves and our leaders. And attitudes, behaviors, and policies. This definition of advocacy means that it is not just my job at Micah Challenge US to try and get a church to embrace the cause of ending extreme poverty and sign a petition. But with this broader definition, our success isn't just if that church signs something. It's if they commit hours to prayer for that issue. It's if they make personal behavioral decisions, that the decisions they make as a consumer, where they're going to bank, how they invest their money, all those kinds of things are transformed for this higher purpose of securing justice. And it really makes our work deeply, deeply sacred. And it really transitions me from a salesman trying to convince a college or a university or a church that my cause is worth their time, instead into a more pastoral role. And we walk alongside people and disciple people, because to do what we're talking about here, this is a deeply spiritual exercise. To examine your own life is a very deeply spiritual exercise. And in fact, it informs how we do our work, because if we really believe that God is the God of justice, then what we need to do is create the space for people to encounter this God in very, very real ways. And so I feel a lot more like a pastor than a policy guy, which is probably good, because I'm better at preaching than I am about talking about technical things. It means helping people encounter God and absorb and learn from who God is. And we do that in Scripture. We do that through discipleship resources. We do that through mobilizing prayer. There's a picture here of a prayer guide we have on the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, it teaches people about the SDGs. Yes, it calls people to take action to make sure our nation does its part to achieve these goals, but it also mobilizes people in faithful, faithful prayer for these goals, for our leaders, and for themselves. Does the way, one of the things I want to ask traditional advocacy organizations that are generally just focused on policy changes, does the way you interact with the church, do you create a space for the church to grieve extreme poverty? Do you create a space for the church to absorb God's heart for mothers who die in childbirth, for children who die unnecessarily? And I really think that that's a measure of how we do our advocacy, is to see, are we becoming more Christ-like because of our engagement? And I really think we have to pause and examine. Are we selling issues and trying to compete with all the other causes in the world? And for my generation, our attention is just being completely in all directions. It's just being thrown at us from every direction, because we have at our fingertips a million different ways to communicate. Social media, traditional media, Facebook, all these things. So with our posture towards the church, with transformational advocacy, we create this encounter to God. It's personal and it's corporate. And one of the greatest things about this strategy is that no longer are we doing something that is competing with the church's own agenda. But what I've found is that pastors open the door for us, because we're helping them do something that they feel called to do, which is shepherd people towards life with Jesus Christ. And by helping people encounter God, understand biblical justice, and try to live it out, even if it involves political action, even if it involves perhaps protesting something, or at least signing an electronic petition. That's the easiest thing you can do. That makes a lot of pastors uncomfortable. I've been asked in a lot of places I speak, hey, give us your message on justice, but don't ask people to sign a petition. What I learned was I just don't tell them about that, and then I go in and then we hand out the petitions and everyone signs them, and it's usually something that I don't have to even ask forgiveness for. But it removes that fear of politics mixing with church when it is nestled comfortably in discipleship and passionate following of Jesus. It just removes that barrier. And I've been shocked, the places where they say, hey, talk more about that anti-corruption policy that's challenging the oil companies. Tell us more about that. And this is in a church service. Or tell us more about foreign assistance and how it impacts people's lives and why we should try to protect these funds. And then the final thing I just want to observe is that if our advocacy really is inspired by Scripture, inspired by people like Esther, people like Moses, Jesus, then it truly has to loosen the chains of injustice. We really have to use that as a measure of how our advocacy is effective. The biblical call clearly demands it, and one of my fellow panelists will be talking more about that. But it's also true that extreme poverty will not simply be overcome with more intervention, more money being thrown into places, more clinics, all these things. Extreme poverty will only be overcome by securing more justice, even in the hardest places to believe it could come, which is usually the political arena. Let's just be frank there. And so that is a standard we have to hold ourselves to. That's something we have to be inspired to. That's what these little girls marching with these signs. This is a 10-year-old photo from Micah Challenge Zambia. So those girls are now young women, and I hope that by being advocates marching in the streets that early, they've grown into young women who are passionately fighting for justice. This other picture is a group that has gone through our book, Live Justly, which is like this discipleship resource on biblical justice that inspires action. We wrote it for a North American audience, but this group in Nigeria got a hold of it, and 600 Nigerian youth are going through this and launching a peace-building campaign and a campaign to try and halt environmental degradation. So this is an action they organized, praying and sitting in the streets. And the final is a photo from Micah Challenge in Australia during the G20 last November, where they set up a stunt. It was a tax haven to show how the abuse, and sometimes legal abuse, one of the problems with corruption is that sometimes it's legal. If you pay enough accountants and lawyers, you can steal the natural resources and money from a nation legally. And that's something we have to challenge. So anyway, they set up this tax haven outside of the G20, trying to bring their attention to the theft of natural resources, the money that could be going towards infrastructure development, healthcare, education, that is now going towards these guys sitting on the beach in fancy suits. There's just some quick links and info. I really would love to hear from you. I think that what you all do as practitioners gives you the credibility to demand justice in ways that other people, perhaps like myself, don't have. I don't think you need to change your careers. I think what you do has built incredible credibility for you to speak out and be a voice. And I know many of you do that. But I just want to inspire you, encourage you to continue doing that. And I think we can do that together. Thank you.
Because we lost one speaker, we've gained a little time for questions. So I think while this topic is hot on your agenda or in your mind, does anybody have a burning question for Jason at this point?
Hello. I just wondered I work for World Relief, and we have an annual justice conference, and I was wondering if you're involved with that. I'm not an expert on the Justice Conference, but I know a little bit about what's going on, and certainly thousands of people and hundreds of churches all meeting together, through the various technologies to talk about justice in the world. I just was wondering what the relationship was. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been at the Justice Conference the last few years. This most recent conference, I got to speak in two of the pre-conferences. One was led by IJM and one was led by World Vision. So we try to be there as best as an organization with limited funds can be there.
Devon McGuire with New Life International. This issue of poverty is something that's been on my heart for many years, ever since I was a missionary kid in Costa Rica and Ecuador, and then went on to India and saw what I thought was real poverty, and then only to find worse later in other places. But I started to write something a number of years ago on poverty, and I don't know, I wrote more than 100 pages and got bogged down, and people that read it felt like I was screaming at them, and I just have kind of a parting thought here of summary that in the last several days has kind of come to me, and as we've discussed this. Strides against extreme poverty will continue to be elusive until the world hears and understands the voice of the Christ follower, that poverty cannot be monetized to a dollar amount per day. Extreme poverty is when we lose everything that matters most, and that is people, no matter the cause.
Thank you for that. Maybe one more question?
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. My name is Stephen Blas. I am a recent alumnus of Johns Hopkins, and I appreciated listening to the progression that you shared of this idea of encountering God leading to a challenge to personal attitudes and behavior. I find it interesting because throughout this conference, and I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I've heard, even at Hopkins, faculty talk about the idea of crafting sermons. These might be secular individuals with no faith commitment in that idea. But the idea of crafting sermons for pastors to dispense health information. And as someone who studied public health, I love health. But it doesn't, at its heart, bring a person to that idea of encountering God first. And I wonder whether or not we've put the horse before the cart, or the other way around, the cart before the horse, at times where we try to put a health message before an encounter. And I wonder if that leaves us short on justice.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for your comments and for sharing. This is the easiest Q&A I've ever done. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that this is a conversation. We have a lot to learn from each other and a lot to share. I've learned after doing a lot of speaking that in a room like this, there are people with stories to tell. And so I really do appreciate hearing from you all. The one thing I'll add, I guess, before I sit down is I mentioned this book that these folks in Nigeria are going through and that a couple thousand people in the US are going through. I brought about however many copies I could fit in my little bag, about 10 copies that I'd be happy. We normally sell them for $12, but I'd be happy to just give them away for free to whoever would be interested. Just don't tell anyone you got it for free, because I still want to charge other people. Yeah, if you're interested in checking that out, and this is not a promo piece of Micah Challenge. This is really about how do we encounter God and let the Spirit speak to our lives and inform the way we interact with policy, with everything. And so if that's of any interest to you, please come find me afterwards and I'll give you a copy of the book. Thanks.
Next up, we have Katie Kraft.
Before I get started, I have to tell you about the evolution of me putting together this presentation. So I think that God works in mysterious ways, and I know that He's worked through me through the CCIH conference, and this is my third time presenting here. First was at the Family Planning Pre-Conference. Second was in a breakout session, and third is the last plenary, so I feel like I'm just moving on up. But I come from the family planning advocacy world. I work for the United Methodist Church's General Board of Church and Society, and I train faith leaders here in the U.S. to be advocates for international family planning and global maternal health. And so this session is called Ending Extreme Poverty Through Advocacy, which is such a lofty thing to think about in 15 minutes. And so I was thinking, okay, I need to talk about why investing in family planning will help break cycles of poverty, and then how we've done that in the United Methodist Church. And then Mona Bormett came to me at 10 o'clock this morning and said, Katie, we had a speaker back out. He was going to talk about the biblical basis for advocacy. Can you weave that in? And I say God works in mysterious ways because I thought I'd been pushing off preparing this presentation for so long until this morning, and couldn't think of a better opportunity than this forum to talk about the biblical basis for advocacy. So I will be covering a little bit about why we in the United Methodist Church and many of you think investing in family planning is important to break the cycles of poverty, and how we've done that advocacy. But also I want to talk about our call as Christians to take on advocacy in our communities and in ourselves and have that personal transformation. So if things are a little bit scattered, that is why. In talking about poverty, I just don't think that we can not talk about women, right? Of course, men and women experience poverty and experience it in different ways, but we know that women make up half the world's population and yet represent 70% of the world's poor. We also know that women give birth to children, right? And that children who are born into poverty are 2 times more likely to die before age 5, and are 3 times more likely not to receive an education. So when we talk about breaking the cycles of poverty, we see that women are sort of at the center of a lot of this work, right? These are big kind of questions we're asking ourselves, and I'm somebody who likes to think in very simple examples. And so for those of you who are already on board with family planning and know this, I apologize for this simple example, but this is helpful for me in thinking about issue-based advocacy to make a real impact on poverty. How can we marry those two? So I think about a young girl who's born into poverty. She's maybe one of many children. She could be here in the US, she could be abroad, right? Her and her brothers and sisters probably lack access to food or water or education, healthcare, or maybe they lack access to agency, right? The power to do something about their situation, the power to make something happen. As she's growing up, a teenager, she may be forced into an early marriage or encouraged to go into an early marriage, and in that marriage may experience an early pregnancy before her body can sustain one in a healthy way. And then when she's on that trajectory without access to family planning, she'll be unable probably to time and space her births. And more children will be born into poverty, and there'll be poor maternal health outcomes. Now, in my world, I focus on that family planning and poor maternal health outcomes. And so it's not just a simple example, it's the experience that a lot of women have every day. So every day, 800 women die from pregnancy or childbirth. For every one that dies, 20 more will suffer birth-related injury or infection. 8,300 neonatal infants will die. 2,700 children are left motherless. And 99% of these deaths and injuries occur in the developing world. Now, we also know that with the investment of family planning, we can reduce these deaths by 30%. When we talk about poverty, we often talk about lack of access to food or water or shelter, but there is a poverty in not being able to have a mother, right? There's a poverty in not being able to experience abundant life, right? And so in my work, we talk about the family planning gap, that if we want to improve maternal health outcomes, we've got to address this gap. There are more than 225 million women who would like to delay or prevent pregnancy but don't have access to the education or to modern, safe contraceptive methods. So we see here that poor maternal health outcomes and lack of access to contraception are both a result of poverty, right, not having access to that care, and also a driver of poverty. So it fits in both places in this cycle. On the flip side, I don't want to just talk about the negative impacts, I want to talk about the positive, right? The benefits of being able to time and space your pregnancies. Obviously, avoiding unintended pregnancies. If you're poor, if you're in a poor family, an unintended pregnancy has a huge impact on you, your body, your finances, your family. It has improved health for mother and child, reduced risk of pregnancy-related complications, recovery and preparation period for a woman. And this gets back to the agency piece I'm talking about, empowering women and their supportive partners to plan their lives and family, having that agency, right? You might not have all of the money in the world, you might not have access to nutritious food, but that ability to have some control over your life and your family can be really healing for some people. And of course, we know this isn't just in one family, it has a ripple effect. A healthy woman earns and owns more, probably has a smaller family if she so chooses, and has more resources to send children to school and feed them. A well-educated girl often delays marriage and has fewer children. A community with healthy women has a larger, more vibrant workforce. And then slowed population growth equals less strain on our land and resources. Obviously, I know this is all very simplistic, right? Wouldn't it be great if this was always perfect and it worked out this way? But I want to flip that bad cycle of poverty that we were talking about before and talk about, in the best case scenario, that we can have a virtuous cycle, right? With access to family planning. If we start with a married couple who's able to plan their family, maybe they choose to have fewer children, 2 sons and a daughter. Although they're not wealthy, they're able to send all of their children to school because they planned to do that. And in order to finish school, maybe their daughter delays marriage. When she does get married, she's been educated by her parents to practice healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy, and the virtuous cycle continues. As practitioners, you know that this is the ideal and it doesn't always happen, but for sake of argument and for advocacy, we have to talk about the benefits and we have to talk about what happens when we don't make the investments. So hopefully I've tied together why family planning as an intervention is important for breaking the cycles of poverty, and it's not the only intervention that matters for sure. It's just the one that I'm steeped into. But in addressing the question that Mona wanted me to talk about today, I want to talk a little bit about how we as Christians can be advocates for family planning, but even back up there and take out the family planning piece. How can we as Christians be advocates? And what does that mean? I think that Jason did a great job of exploring what that means for us personally and in our communities. But we also know that as Christians, we look to the Bible, we look to scriptures when we're kind of grappling with these tough questions. And so in order to understand what advocacy means for us as Christians, we have to begin with what we know about the character of God. Throughout the scriptures, God condemns sins of injustice. God decries the way that we neglect or even abuse our brothers and sisters. And at the same time, God is a refuge for those who are treated unjustly. And while God protects the oppressed and condemns injustice, we know that God also sent Jesus to us, right? And that Jesus is a manifestation of God's desire to reconcile our brokenness here on earth, the brokenness of humanity. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus quotes the prophet Isaiah when he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to let the oppressed go free." And so we know that to be a follower of Christ is to serve the world in a way that brings wholeness, abundant life for all people in the here and now. It's the essence of Christianity. It's what it means to follow Christ, bringing wholeness to all people, ending the cycles of extreme poverty through advocacy. It's a mighty task. And because it's a mighty task, it's one we must set out to do with all that we are. That, of course, includes using our voices to proclaim Christ's promise of freedom. But this isn't just to free others from poverty, it's also to free ourselves too. Advocacy, the way I think about it, and the way that Jason articulated it, is like a ministry, right? It's an expression of our Christian faith and a way to be in relationship and connection with the Holy Spirit and our brothers and sisters in Christ, to help us move closer to what we talk about in the United Methodist Church as social holiness. So it's not just for people out there that we'll never meet, but it's for us too. It's for the transformation of our souls. So how do we do that very thing? Well, in my campaign, the Healthy Families, Healthy Planet campaign, we developed a theology around advocacy for women and girls by asking ourselves the question, why does God care about maternal health and family planning? Why? That's a critical question for us as Christians if we're going to do advocacy in this work. We can't find the statistics and then find the Bible later, right? It needs to be deeply rooted. God cares about maternal health and family planning because women and girls, like men and boys, are made in the image of God, Imago Dei. Women and girls are children of God with sacred worth, and lack of access to contraception keeps women and girls from experiencing health and wholeness. And we know this in the stories that we collect all around the globe. And as people of faith, we're called to take action. And taking action is what I do. I help direct the Healthy Families, Healthy Planet project, which was started in 2010. It's an initiative of our General Board of Church and Society for the United Methodist Church. And we work to mobilize United Methodists on the importance of maternal health and international family planning. We do this through our ambassador program, where we've trained 150 faith leaders in the US. They come from all across the country and get messaging and develop advocacy plans and really explore in their soul why they want to take this issue on and why they're called to this work. We support them in the community through calls and emails and connection and relationships, because asking folks to do advocacy isn't just about asking them to do something for you, it's about being in a relationship with them. We develop advocacy-focused resources to support them along the way and also bring folks together around key community moments to lift these issues up in their communities. We've had some good success. We've hosted more than 400 events around family planning, maternal health in churches and local communities, published lots of places, and built a successful community of advocates all across the country while engaging high-level leaders. And within our church have passed a resolution calling upon local congregations to be involved in this work. And this resolution will hopefully stand for decades to come to provide a basis to continue the work in the church, especially as it relates to advocacy. So the timing of this plenary indicates to me that maybe this is supposed to be inspiring, right? It's been a long weekend, and the concept of advocacy can sometimes be so overwhelming. And so in the spirit of this conversation about sort of creating or planning life as it relates to family planning, I'd like to leave you with some words from my good friend, Reverend Jackson Day, who at a CCIH event back in December, I had asked Jack to present a sermon on the biblical basis for family planning. A copy of his sermon is online, and I highly suggest that you check it out. Jack is brilliant, and I'm not just saying that because he's a United Methodist pastor, by the way. But Jack says the following: created in the image of God, we humans are first and foremost creators. And it dawned on me that Jack said this to talk about creating life in context of family planning, but I also think the concept applies to creating the kind of world that we want to live in, the kind of world that God wants us to live in. Jack says, created in the image of God, humans have agency, the ability to make things happen. Creativity, the ability to make things happen that never happened before. Purpose, the ability to make things happen over time. And passion, the desire to make things happen. So I hope you all will go forth as children of God, created in the divine image with sacred worth, to make this happen. To end the cycle of poverty through advocacy, to bring wholeness to all people. It is a mighty task indeed. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. And let's take a few minutes if anybody has questions or comments about Katie's presentation. Anybody? I know it's late in the day. Okay, good one. Here.
Hello, my name is Naveed. I'm from Pakistan. In one of your slides, you mentioned about HTSP. What is HTSP?
Thank you for that question. I hope some of my World Vision colleagues are in the room here. HTSP is the Healthy Timing and Spacing of Pregnancy, and it is a message that was developed by our friends at World Vision, and they do a great presentation about what the tenets of healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy is. But essentially, it's allowing couples the ability to time and space their pregnancies in ways that are healthiest for them. And so that often the recommendation is until once a woman becomes 18, gives herself 24 months between delivery and the next birth, gives her 6 months after a miscarriage and things like that. So there's technical guidelines that go along with healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy, but I think it's noted that it's also used as sort of a concept, right, that we want women to have access to, and couples.
Good afternoon. I am an obedient rebel, so I usually find problems staying near or behind this. I think it symbolizes too much power. Thank you. In 2012, our Minister of Community Development, Mother and Child Health made a very important commitment on behalf of the country. He made a commitment to double the amount that the government had set aside for family planning in Zambia. You can imagine the applause he got. That was good, wasn't it? In 2012, the government had not set aside any money for family planning. What is double of zero? And I want us to remember this as at the end I'm going to get back to this because it's important. I didn't prepare anything about defining poverty because I assumed that if I'm the last speaker, the previous ones would have defined it by that time. But I just want to say this. Poverty has got dimensions. It has got different aspects of poverty. There can be poverty in terms of water, in terms of food, in terms of health, in terms of knowledge. So my assumption is still the same. I think all the people in here know what poverty is. So, what is the relationship between poverty and advocacy? I'm going to start by talking about power. The first thing I want to say is that the powerful people who occupy offices of influence, dictators, tyrants, all of them need the permission of the powerless to continue being powerful. The rules of how power is generated, how it is used, how it is gained, how it is lost, who it works for, who it listens to, can be rewritten at any time. At any time. That the masses, the people who give power, the people, the source of power, decide. Any time. The masses cannot change their reality with without this understanding. The powerful need the masses not to make this realization. Their continued dictatorship, looting, benefiting from the sweat of the poor is dependent on this not ever happening. It is the work of advocates, all of us in here, to wake up the populace from this slumber that I am talking about. This is the slumber that creates hate, it creates broken people, it creates inequality, it kills people from preventable diseases and conditions. It creates maternal mortality. It creates the cycle which we were talking about. Health, advocacy is important to overcome poverty, because health is wealth. I come from a poor country relative to the US, and more than 80% of the workforce in my country is in the informal sector. What this means is that people's livelihood depend on how they are feeling. If they are sick, their economy is sick. If you get a bout of malaria during the planting season, that means your household for the next 12 months will not have food. Simply put, the poor cannot afford to be sick. For the rich, the people who go for work, if you are sick, you go on sick leave. If every day you go out to look for what we call piecework and you are sick that day, it has got consequences. If you're a bus driver in Lusaka and you get sick for 1 week, when you come back, your employer has found another driver. That is the impact of ill health. I repeat, the poor cannot afford to be sick. Health is a shared reality. Now, I know we've had presentations about the health system in this country and that country and that country. If diseases had a conference like us, Ebola, malaria, HIV, they would really laugh at us. Because there's no such thing as a country health system. The truth of the matter is that Ebola can be born at 14 hours today in Liberia. Tomorrow morning, it will be in Washington. We share one destiny when it comes to health. The problem in health in one place on this planet can easily visit another place in a matter of hours. But in our human wisdom, we feel very safe and snug because that is a Liberian problem. Oh, the health system in Zambia is very bad. I wouldn't go there. Diseases don't need your permission and a visa. That is the truth. Diseases don't need visas. Health is a shared reality. As human beings, we share in the thriving or decimation of diseases. What is the solution to poverty? That's the first thing. We need to make power work for the poor and vulnerable. How do we do that? I work for CHAZ. It's an organization which at one time had 50,000 orphans on a grant. Do you know how we used that 50,000, the money we were using, how we were supporting that 50,000 children? We were paying government to educate those children. Now, I want you to understand what this fundamentally means. The government has got a policy on free education in Zambia. And I was hosting some Senate staffers, and they asked me, Yoram, you are paying government which says the policy on education is free, but you are giving government money for orphans to attend school. I said yes. Because the free education policy for our government means that you can't pay money straight to the government. You pay it to the school. And the reason you pay it to the school is because the parents and teachers have to have a meeting in which they look at the grant they get from government. And if the grant is inadequate, then the parents and teachers, in order to sustain that school, have to decide on an amount that each child has to pay. And the government knows this. It is not illegal. So simply put, what we were doing there is that we were paying government who taxes us in the name that they'll provide education. We were paying paying the money to provide education. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the people in power were actually working for the poor and vulnerable? Making those who claim to work for the people answerable to the people. 5 years ago, I went to my first post-budget analysis meeting, and we had the Minister of Finance. And the Minister of Finance was very angry. He got to a point where he wanted to go into this ask not what the government will do for you thing that most politicians do. So he said, I am in a neighborhood, and this is a neighborhood where you build your own house. And I called my neighbors to say, let's fix the road. And my neighbors didn't want to be part of it. That is the problem with us Zambians. We don't want to get up and do things for ourselves. We want everything to be done for us by government. I was very angry in that meeting. The reason I was angry was because the government, for where he's staying, were charging the equivalent of $2,500 as service charge. Now, let me explain what service charge is. Service charge is when you are building and you pay that to government, they are supposed to provide 3 things to you: a road, water, and electricity. Now, this is a Minister of Finance who is in charge of that money which I have paid. And he should not have the audacity to come to my house and ask me to remove money from my pocket to start constructing a road. You understand? So I told him in front of everyone, I said, you have no right at all to ask that ask. And you are lucky you didn't come to my house. Now, why is that an important thing? In Africa and elsewhere, we've got a warped. There's somehow things have been hijacked. Things have changed, and people don't even understand that they have changed. It is very common in Africa for politicians to stand up and say to NGOs, we have a problem of maternal and child health. What are you doing about it? And it's the NGOs start explaining, no, you see, we have a problem. We've got a program, but donor funding hasn't come. We have changed roles. The people who should be asked questions are asking us questions. And somehow it's become acceptable. The solution to poverty is giving advocates the confidence that the work they can make a difference in the world, where people who were promising have been reduced to co-conspirators in maintaining the status quo. Why is advocacy central to ending poverty? Whenever I go to a village, I used to ask them, where does development start? What is development? Because many people in Africa think development is skyscrapers. Development is not a skyscraper or a tarmac or the latest technology. Development begins in here. If it is not taking place here, even if I am driving the latest limo and in first class, there is no development whatsoever. Because that is where it begins. How do we free our minds from the software which has been put there by cartels, power cartels? In Africa today, in many countries, democracy is even confusing. You vote for one group, they go in power. The next day, the people who are in another party are in the ruling party. You know what I'm talking about? So you don't know whether, yes, you've really voted them out of power or not. All that is done in the name of inclusiveness, bipartisanship, tribal balancing. That's the name given. Bottom line, there's a power cartel. They were exchanged. One party has won, the other one has lost, but the people who never win are the electorate. They will never win. Advocacy helps us to ask the question, why? you cannot do advocacy without having analyzed the problem. And that is the beauty of advocacy. It is to know why something is happening down to the root cause. Advocacy must result in critical and informed view of the world. I was doing a program with nuns last month, training them in advocacy. And some of them had been helping orphans and vulnerable children for more than 30 years. And I asked them a simple question. At district level, what is the national mechanism for helping orphans? They didn't know. What that meant was that the money meant for orphans at district level was going to the daughters and sons of people who had money, so that the poor were not getting that money. 2 years ago, we had a university graduate at university. She was denied entry into the highest institution twice. She got distinctions in every subject. She committed suicide. Some of the people who were going into that bursaries are coming from very well-to-do families. They fly business class. Advocacy prevents the duty-bearer moral hazard trap. What is moral hazard? It is the idea that I am taxing you and saying I'm working for you, but I get the money, pocket it, and ask you to sort out your own problems. That is what is happening in Africa. That is what is happening in the world. There is a sense that the poor are challenged to resolve their own problems. Ask not what the government will do for you. Rather, what you will do for your government. Government meaning them. Advocacy forces practitioners, and this is what he was talking about, to look at the work they are doing and how that is helping the powerless realize their power within, agency. And with power within, they can then work on power with. They combine forces and hands with other people facing the same challenges. And with that, they can change their today, they can change their now, and they can change their tomorrow. The goal of advocacy is to create a culture of accountability for resources and, more importantly, results. I have always asked, when we were talking about the budget, if the Minister of Education gives us result for school leavers and he says 75% of the students have failed, why should we give him money next year? But more importantly, why should he keep his job? He's failing us. We've reached a point where the public system is not accountable for results. The Minister of Finance during the budget speech tells us how he's going to tax us and where he's going to spend us, the money. He doesn't talk about what he achieved with last year's money. How many of us at personal level can be paying a gardener with the grass which is brown and not there? How many? Why is it that the same thinking cannot apply at national level? Why is it that people in positions of authority using public resources should not be accountable for results? Why? This is the issue I was saying. We need to ask the question, why? Because if we fail to ask the simple questions of why, we should ask ourselves, are we liberated in the mind? I want to talk about the last one because I've been told that time is finished. So I'll quickly go to my last 3 points. This is our collective task. We should get on our knees and pray and fast and pray that we should have enough naivety to believe that our work can make a difference. Now, I've called it naivety because very many people, the older you get, the more experienced you get, the more you conform. The more you realize how the world works. And When you realize how the world works, how the whole world functions, you don't try and change anything. You have to find your way within the system, the way it works. This is one of the reasons why poverty won't end, because we all conform with how it works. And how it works is how it creates poverty and perpetuates poverty. We need to nurture advocates. There's no school for advocacy in Africa. I've always had fights with my donors because I always want young, fresh graduates from college to come and work in my office for 6 months or so as interns, because I want them to understand so that they are agents of change. And the last thing, in the last 20 years or so in development, there's been an issue that about 5 to 10% of every project should go towards M&E. Am I correct? M&E. Meaning, if you're running that orphan program and funding all those 50,000 children, you should have M&E. Well, I'm saying every project from now should have an advocacy component. Because with advocacy, you are going to get to the root cause why the project was necessary in the first place. You are going to ensure that before it ends, there are policies in place and they are working. And they are working for who? The poor. That is what I'm saying. No project without an advocacy component. The last thing, and it's not on the slides. The last thing is we need to examine the whole global industry of advocacy. And you will see that in Africa, we have issues which we need to deal with, but maybe we don't have resources. When are we going to get to a time when some of the advocacy issues are determined by Africans themselves, but supported by people who have resources elsewhere? Because it's a different ball game. We're not saying CCIH, PI, and other people can have passion about mother and child health issues. No, we're saying that is a valid thing. But what about that real advocacy issue which the person in country X knows is important, but it needs to be taken to a national magnitude for it to happen, but they are in a very poor country? How is that going to be fueled? Where is the help to get that idea going to come from? Where are we going to get people who are open-minded enough to hear things from the grassroots which need to be supported? That is my question. I end here.
Yoram, thank you so much. Any burning questions for Yoram? I will happily yield the mic. There's one right here. Two right there.
Why are you running for the next election?
Okay, hi, my name is Hawa, and I just finished my MPH program in Hopkins. I want to say thank you to all the presenters. It's been amazing, and well, I talk with tears in my heart, I talk with tears in my eyes, I talk with tears in every part of my body. That's because you just woke up something in me. The fact that Africa needs help, and the help needs to come from ourselves and not from the outside. Why have I said so? A few months back, my country, Nigeria, ran its elections. And the masses began to cry because we had seen that we had suffered so much that suffering became the norm. When we ask things like, how are you doing? We give responses like, I didn't manage, I'm just managing. But the politicians who make less than 10% of the country are not managing at all. That's where the money is. They have all of our money in their pockets. That's why I'm here in the US. Because I got tired. You live day by day, you're not sure of where your next meal is going to come from. So at some point, we had to take, law into our hands, basically. We had to make the change. But then I say to myself, as well as I say to my parents, we are Christians, but we sit, cross our legs, and criticize the government. I said to my dad, why don't you go into politics if you know so much about the Bible? And then he says, well, I don't want to, And then, but that's the question I really have for every one of us here. As Christians, we sit in the room and we say all the things that should be done and how poverty should be alleviated and how the poor should be taken care of. But trust me, the politicians have no care about those who live in poverty. All they want to do is enrich their pockets. At least I'm sure that my brothers in Nigeria and in most parts of Africa want to enrich their pockets. So at the end of the day, I think it's a challenge for us who are Christians to try and take up the courage and go into politics. I don't know if I will survive if I go into politics. I just may see so much money. And then I don't know, I hope I don't forget my Christian values. But I think this is really very important. It's a challenge for us. When I came into this country for my MPH program, I wanted to work with orphans, widows, I had so much for the vulnerable people. But then I didn't see so many of them. That's because the country here takes care of them, I must say. And I give kudos to them. When are we going to learn this as Africans? I really pray and I hope we do learn. And for CCIH, thank you for the great work you're doing in Africa. And I hope you consider my country, Nigeria. I really hope so. I've heard so much in Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Kenya, and Sanru, and all the great things happening. But then I scrunch my neck and I'm like, what's happening in my country, Nigeria? But I wouldn't blame you because my country is rich. I will tell you that. My country is very rich. But unfortunately, 90% live in poverty. And less than 10% have the wealth. I really hope that God will help us. Thank you.
I guess I'll stand up. I want to thank all the speakers. I was very moved by everything that was said. Like things I'll take home and find hopefully, as I say, as Oscar Wilde said, I wish I said that. And I'm sure I'll use some of your quotes because they were so fantastic. But securing justice, I really appreciating that just coming down to the basis of advocacy is securing justice. And so much of what you all said. But I just want to say that one thing that really strikes me as working in the field of international development, it's actually easy to do charity. And it's welcomed by everybody. I mean, good and bad people, good politicians, bad politicians welcome charity. And if we're doing a food for work project, if we're doing a relief project, people are all willing to invite you into the country, and you are truly that's perceived to be truly missional God's work. And I can tell you with MCC that if we found that we accidentally even saw that, we could really help this farmer by giving them some market share, maybe by setting up something so they can sell their food later in the year, and you start to affect market relations, then you start touching on justice issues, and you can tell because you're in trouble and no one likes you because there are beneficiaries of injustice. It's important to understand that there are beneficiaries, and when you try to change those social relations, you are going to upset those beneficiaries. And so that's my experience, and it takes a huge amount of courage, and people that take that courage are like Dr. Martin Luther King. People that are willing to take the prophetic power of the church are really willing to die for it. And in our case, maybe get thrown out of the country or get our mission thrown out of the country. Or, the thing is that it has real consequences. When you start working for justice, you have to be willing to give it all up, to be kicked out, to have something, happen on that level. Because that's what we found is that as we touch on a justice issue, you lose your friends. And that's just a reality. Advocacy is hard, even, in your own country. And I think it's really hard when you start to try to do it in another place.
I couldn't agree with you more. Advocacy is certainly hard, and it's the hardness that the crooks benefits from. It's because it's hard that the unjust continue to create an unjust world. The only thing they need to do from time to time is make an example of one advocate, just from time to time, one in every 5 years, to scare off everybody else, because they can see what happens to an advocate. That's why my presentation was about not one, not two, but opening the minds of an entire group. Let me give you an example of what happened in Egypt. All of us, the entire world today is cowed into the idea that political activism and citizenship is voting every 4 or 5 years. So it means after you voted someone into power today, and you realize after 30 days that he is totally corrupt, is going to mess up your country, the only thing you can say is, wait, we're going to sort you out in 5 years. And what the Egyptians, who were novices at democracy, did is they threw him out in the first year when he was messing up. They said, no, we are not going to wait for 4 years. And that's how Morsi was kicked out. That's the truth. They said, look, I mean, you messed up in year 1. We don't have 4 years to wait. You have to go. And that is a critical example of how the more we create a mass, the more difficult it is to victimize one person. And that is why the work of advocates is really two things: to create more advocates as much as you are advocating for something. Because advocacy is a state of mind. It's a freedom fighter mentality. But and it's not about, guns and bombs, no, but the freedom fighter mentality of liberating, bringing justice, fullness of life to everyone. But that's the issue. We need to make sure we are too many. If we are few, they'll make examples out of 1 or 2 and they'll scare off everyone.
I think our time has run out. I'm sorry. But please join me in thanking all 3 panelists for this wonderful session.
Wow, that was great. Exceeded expectations. That was really fantastic. I've known Jason for a little while and talked with him over the phone and been in some meetings with him, and I've never heard him give a presentation, and somebody said, he's really, really good. You're really, really good. And Katie, I don't know how I cannot at the last minute do what you did, and I'm very impressed with people who can just on the spur of the moment throw something together. That was really great. Thank you. And Yoram, Carl you stole my line. So I won't repeat that, but it occurred to me that if your sister associations and other countries don't have an advocacy person like you, then they should clone you, because that was really, really good. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. This really was a great way to end the conference.